Bhaktivedanta Swami I grew up in Texas, and they weren't particularly religious. Occasionally went to church. They dropped me off, on a Sunday when I was a kid, come back and get me. But uh, but I actually, I felt pretty strong callings. I had myself baptized, without telling anybody. My parents just hated that, took me out of that church, put me in a Methodist church. And, then, I always had that sense of searching for things like that, as people do. And then, I kind of lost interest in that side of it. Although, I remember having a friend in high school who was a Catholic, and I just, oh, well, take me with you, take me with you. I wanted to go and hear. And of course, I loved the incense, the bow down, all of that made sense to me. And was always buying, some photograph of something, some mystic or someone, that I had no idea who they were, and putting it up in my room. But always, inclined towards the mystical side of things. Um, even in even in the '60s, under the effects of various drugs, that's all I was after was a mystical experience. And when I began to see that for so many of my friends, it was just that change. It was just, you know, whatever, partying, whatever, and turning to harder drugs, things like that. So I became very disillusioned, very disillusioned. I was very, active in Vietnam War protests, things like that. As I saw that wasn't working, the idea that we're going to heal the world with peace and love wasn't really happening. So I took off, went out to California, ended up in Laguna Beach. This was 1969, and was, I was living in a little cave up in a hill, above, near where the old temple was in Woodland Avenues, I think it was. And met somebody, and he said, "You want to come to the Hare Krishna temple?" And, he said, you got to sit there and listen to them, but they have really good food. So I went. And, he got ready to leave and said, "Come on." And I said, "No, I think I'm going to stay." And that was Sukadev Prabhu and devotee, his name, I'm sure you've seen his picture, Durlab Prabhu, um, and Rishabh Dev. And so I would just go there every day and sit and, you know, uh, Rishabh Dev used to say I was a fully realized yogi coming out of his cave to the temple, which it wasn't quite true, of course. But they didn't have very many books, but Sukadev would just sit there and read the Bhagavad Gita to me, and we'd talk about it. And then, so I was doing that regularly. And then he told me they were going up to Los Angeles because their guru was there. And so I went along, and, a powerful experience walking into that temple room, the old temple room in LA. And there was Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasan, Vishnu Janan leading the kirtan, and full of devotees, and just the powerful feeling of deja vu, if that's the right term. But I just remember thinking, this is where I belong. So I went back down to Laguna Beach, shaved up, and then Durlab went off to India with Prabhupada, and I don't know where Rishabh went, but it was really just me and Sukadev. And so he put me in charge of the deity worship. We had little Jagannath deities. And so, in those days, it was, you just did everything. And so, but I was attracted to deity worship. So I did that. And then we'd go out on kirtan all day long, he and I, he playing the mridanga, me playing the kartals, and up and down the boardwalk. And It was pretty wonderful, and we got a lot of people would come to the Sunday feast, and it was a thriving temple. A lot of devotees joined there.
When I was young, I was studying to be a Catholic priest. Went to seminary and when I was 15 years old. So I lived in a seminary monastery for only a year. And I started praying and fasting for 3 days at a time, praying that I didn't really know where to go, although my background was Roman Catholic. I was praying more generally to God to send me a spiritual teacher. And on that basis, I was fasting. I was saying, if things go wrong with this particular situation I was in, then I would search out a spiritual teacher. And things went horribly wrong. Things went quite wrong. And I left Vancouver and traveled to Montreal, Canada, which is about 3,000 miles away, but Canada is a very big country. The temple in Montreal at that time was in Park Avenue. Prabhupada, this is 1972. And Prabhupada actually, that temple was already there when Prabhupada stayed in Montreal a few years prior to this, because he went to Montreal to get visa. Canada was a Commonwealth country, so he had shelter in Canada while reapplying for a new visa for America. So his residence was very close there, but this is 3 years later, 1972, 3 or 4 years later. And it was an old converted bowling alley. And the walls between everything were just curtains, so the Mataji's behind one curtain or wasn't complete. But when I went the next day on Monday, there was a sign outside, only open Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So I didn't go in. I went back to my room and waited till Wednesday. And I went in, and all the devotees were out in Harinam, Sankirtan. At the time, there were only about, I think, 13 devotees living in the temple, men and women. There was only one bathroom, shared. Everything was in the same small bathroom. And we would line up in the... Anyway, that's later. But I went on the Wednesday. The devotees were out in Sankirtan, and the temple president's wife, Urvashi. Temple president was Sripati. He was from England. She was American. Husband and wife managing the temple. And she was doing noon arti. And there was no tape recorder or music or anything, so she was singing. A very nice voice, and the atmosphere was so wonderful. So I asked the devotees when they came back if I could spend the night. I thought, if they're cheating, I will know by spending the night if they're living the philosophy which they're teaching. So I stayed the night. I had long hair and beard, and I stayed the night, and everything was good. It was foreign, but everything was... I couldn't look at Lord Jagannath, because in Christianity, they don't allow these carvings, and it was so very strange. So I thought, no, I'm not going to look, I'm only going to listen. And then one night was good, and I thought, oh, it's easy to cheat people one night. I'll ask to stay another night. So that never ended, because I stayed all, for basically the rest of my life.
Was disenchanted with the whole material life, material world. I thought the whole thing doesn't make any sense, because we study, we go to school, then we get a degree, we get a husband, a kid, a house, a car, and then we die. So I felt that there must be something else. So although I didn't know that I was searching for spirituality, I didn't know that I would find answers in any kind of spiritual path. I just knew that I was not satisfied with the status quo. So I was going to Catholic school, and our teacher asked us to do a survey or comparative study of different religions. Because of my state of mind, because of my lack of interest in everything, I just thought, "Oh, okay, I'll just choose to go with the good kids, and they'll do the study, and I will put my name on the report, and I will get my marks." And they chose to study Hatha Yoga, Zen Buddhism, and the Hare Krishna people. So the other members of the team thought that Krishna consciousness had something very positive, and they wanted me to come also and listen to what they had to say. So I went to the temple, and I had many questions. I was very arrogant, very proud. And the person that I spoke to, he'd only been a devotee for 2 weeks. Of course, in those days, if you were a devotee for 2 years, you were temple president, and 3 years you were GBC. So, you know, if you put the relevance, he was not senior, but was 2 weeks a devotee. So he was answering so many questions, and then at one point, not knowing anymore what to say, he said, "All I can tell you is that there is something very special about this mantra. And if you just start chanting, all your questions will be answered." I took it as a challenge. I said, "Oh yes? Well, I'll prove you wrong. I will start chanting." So actually, I became a devotee because of a dare, because of a challenge. And I started chanting, and of course, at first it said 16 rounds, so I thought it was 16 of those round things. So I thought, oh, 16, well, I can do that. 16 rounds a day. But it only took a few days before I realized that he meant 16 times around the whole mala. But that's when I started chanting, and I haven't stopped. So that was 1971.
I was sent up to LA they used to say, go up and get trained up. And they put me under Srila Prabhu's instruction to learn deity worship more. And Vishnu Janan taught me how to play the instruments. No, I was initiated by letter. And in that letter, Prabhupada said, this name Dipak means like Krishna is the light that guides us. And so always be devoted to Krishna and learning this philosophy so you can be guided. And so that stuck with me. I hate it that old Keshava took that letter and kept it, and didn't give it to me. But oh well. So I stayed there for a while, and then they sent me to Australia. Prabhupada was coming in a few months to install Radha Krishna deities. And so they needed someone who knew deity worship and knew how to they needed someone there to play the instruments. The Upendra had moved on somewhere else. And so got on the plane and went, and this is an interesting fact to me that all my life I wanted to go to Australia for reasons I don't understand, but I just did. And then to get that chance, I said, sure, I'll go, So I got there, and, it was pretty magical to me. A tiny little temple, just a little storefront, really small. Not really any bigger than the original New York temple. So we got ready for Prabhupada's visit, and, of course, very exciting. And then we thought he was going to come later, and then the plane came early, so then we're like racing out to the airport to get him. I'm back trying to get the altar looking nice, tiny little altar, and devotee Upananda Prabhu and I cooking, and then in comes Srila Prabhupada. And of course, it was amazing. amazing experience, moving in awe, is the appropriate term. And then he came the next day to install the deities, Radha Gopinath. He gave them that name. They're about, I don't know, 18 inches tall, 24 maybe. I think they're the only deities in the movement where the deity is actually fully clothed, the carving. And there's, of course, a very interesting story about that an Indian man tried to send them to Sydney, and then somehow they didn't get picked up, got sent back to India, and then Prabhupada got them and brought them back with him. So we started in on the installation and the fire, so he had to make us Brahmins first. And then he looked at the altar and he said, where are the flowers? I'm like, uh-oh, I guess I don't know so much about deity worship. So I ran downstairs, couldn't find the treasure, so I ran downstairs and had to, shoulder the door in and get the money, give it to a girl to run down the street and buy some flowers to get them on the altar. Meanwhile, I'm getting initiated. And, I was, 20 years old, so I'm like very intimidated by Srila Prabhupada, it's maybe a better word. But there's some wonderful photographs of this. I saw one posted this morning, a little fire ceremony going on and him explaining things. I did get my Brahminical initiation that day first, so I could assist him. And then we just, went through that process of the fire ceremony, the jugna, everything, and then getting up and I offered the first artik to the deities, and he told me, you must take this deity worship very seriously and be very strict about it. And so I took that to heart, and it caused a little conflict with me and a couple of other devotees who said, no, just come on, go out on Sankirtan. And I did go on Sankirtan, but not as much as they wanted me to. So now I've got to stay back and cook, and I've got to do this, do that, But anyway, it all worked out. And then, we moved later to a temple in Glebe in Sydney, suburb of Sydney, and had a bigger temple. Took a house and fixed it up, as we did in those days. And then Prabhupada came back, and he then told us that when he had left before, he had told the deities that now I am leaving you here in the hands of these malechas. You will have to instruct them, because I cannot. And so, we all listen to that and go, oh my gosh. I noticed he didn't smile a whole lot that first visit. You could tell he was very concerned. But anyway, that was a nice thing to hear, because he said, now the temple's very beautiful. We had a beautiful altar, everything. So deities were dressed. We were doing a good job.
His letters, for some time when he would write letter to a devotee, when the letter came, the mail was always in the hands of the temple president. And usually the letters were read to all the devotees, even a lot of the personal letters. But then what ended up happening was that letters would come and there would be specific instruction given to that devotee's writing. And we would all take Prabhupada's instructions for everybody. So if that sometimes caused trouble. It caused trouble because that specific instruction was meant for the recipient, not for everybody. So it's very important in that sense. We saw difficulties at times. And in that sense, I found it was very important to actually be careful. If a specific instruction is given to one individual, it doesn't necessarily apply to somebody else. There's a personal aspect of the relationship that we have with our spiritual master. As Srila Prabhupada is writing in his books, sometimes when you're reading his books, you feel something penetrating you personally. And we have to accept that as Prabhupada talking to us. but we shouldn't generalize. And there was a tendency to generalize, and that may still be there, even after all these years. One specific thing was that many of Prabhupada's letters were published in the books. So there's these volumes of Prabhupada's letters. And I always wondered, it would be really nice if somehow we could find out and publish the letters that were written to Prabhupada and the questions that were asked, so we could balance it with a better understanding, because the answer or the responses of Prabhupada didn't necessarily apply to everybody.
My first encounter was not exactly a physical one. I was visiting the Montreal temple regularly. There was one devotee there, Ishan was his name. Maybe you've met him. He was the devotee who later on created those Balaram Mridangas. So he received a letter from Srila Prabhupada. The temple was like a close family, only a handful of devotees there. So when he received the letter from Srila Prabhupada, he sat on a bench in the prasadam room, and we all surrounded him. And he read the letter out loud. Now, as I said earlier, English was not my first language, so it was a bit a struggle all the time to understand. I had to really try hard. I wasn't too bad in English, but I had to try. So mostly I absorbed what was in the letter more than I remember what was said. I actually don't remember at all what the subject matter was. But I saw Ishan, who was quite a bit older. He must have been old. Must have been very old, like 25 years old. We were all teenagers. So he was reading this letter, and there were big tears down both of his eyes as he was reading Srila Prabhupada's letter. And this was the first time I sort of perceived Prabhupada's presence through the love of his devotee for him. Before that, it wasn't as concrete as the oop oop was Prabhupada. So that was my first encounter.
One day, their Satsvarup asked me, "Do you want to take Prabhupada's prasadam into him?" So I said, "Me?" I said, I had cooked it, but he said, "Go on." So I took it in, sat down, offered my obeisances. I said, "Srila Prabhupada, may I ask you a question?" And Prabhupada said, "Yes." And I said, what is the secret to devotional service? What is the secret to making advancement? Now, this was coming from a pretty puffed up place. I thought, I'm going to learn something nobody else knows, And Prabhupada said, chant 16 rounds and read the books. And so I'm just sitting there and I don't know what to say to that, So I offered my obeisance and left. But, you learn it's, as we know, it's a simple process. It's not complicated. It just requires the practice to be in that spiritual place.
When Siddhanta Swami was preaching in Japan, just after leaving Japan, he came to Vancouver. So I had his association. Siddhanta was the actor. And he came through Vancouver. And again, years later, I heard how Siddhanta Swami was told by Srila Prabhupada that Lord Chaitanya would come and Prabhupada would personally come and save him when he left his body. And Prabhupada had said, any devotee that goes to foreign lands like this preaching, that it means a great deal to Srila Prabhupada. So I was thinking, that's what I want to do. So I went to South Africa and opened a preaching center, and Mauritius to help with preaching there. And these days I'm trying to help in Cambodia. So I thought, I need to do something that captures Srila Prabhupada's attention.
At one point, Jagadish, who was our GBC, told me that Srila Prabhupada said to him, and this was in reference to the Canadian devotees doing all the temple services. It was one of the devotee who, although she stayed at the yoga ashram, would be brought in to cook for the devotees. So we were the ones who stayed back from all the programs, and we did all the backup. And Srila Prabhupada told Jagadish, I like my Canada devotees. So the importance of Vani was there.
And then I was driving him out. We were all going on the morning walk. And we were in a little Volkswagen van, and he got in the seat, and he was just looking at me and just beaming and laughing. And he said, do you know what this name Dipak means? And I said, well, I read the letter you sent me. And he just kept laughing, and that was all there was. And I was just, I was too timid to say, no, can you tell me more? But so off we went on the walk. And I never learned, if I encounter Prabhupada in another life, I will ask him, what was that all about? But it was, all this, everybody else in the van were like heads forward, and nothing came of that. But it did. Something did come of it. But we, in the temple, if he was giving a class, he would, he'd get these incredible facial expressions, and telling a story and acting out the parts. And, we'd all just be just rolling on the floor, because it seems so funny to us. And it was, it was wonderful, to see and to have experienced that side of Srila Prabhupada, because he could be, the morning I was in there asking him about what the secret was, he was as serious as he could be. And that was a really nice reprieve.
So I was president briefly, but then Prabhupada was sick, so I couldn't go and be with Prabhupada. And at the time, the devotees were being asked to focus on book distribution. Prabhupada's health will be restored if you go out in book distribution and things like that. I know when Srila Prabhupada actually, I went back to Vancouver, I was asked to sell a property that the devotees didn't find suitable. So this was in the mountains and very isolated. So I went there to sell the property in October of 1977. It was cold winter, and I was just myself and my wife were staying some distance from the farm because the farm was not suitable anymore. So I only found out that Prabhupada left his body 3 days afterwards, because it was only landlines in those days. Nobody had cell phones or anything. And when we heard the news and I had to look after this farm, it's up a mountain like this. It was so devastating, I thought, I'll just drive off the mountain and finish my life. What is the use of our life without Prabhupada? But like Krishna told, Lord Chaitanya, he told Sanatana Goswami that don't go commit suicide, your body belongs to me. So our bodies become the property of our spiritual master. We should always think in terms of service to him. And despite the fact that things may be very depressed at times because of situations like that, we should just carry on somehow or other. even as devotees within the society, maybe challenges. But everything is passing, you know? Everything that has a beginning has an end, except devotional service, right? So you just keep doing devotional service and pray for the day that we'll personally be again in the association. We're still in the association of Prabhupada. He's here very much. And that was our mood then. And as long as we maintain that mood even now, everything can be very vibrant and wonderful. And I think devotees that serve very intently like that, they feel that. They have that experience. Yeah.
So, do you want to take initiation tomorrow? And the first one said, oh, I'm not qualified. And then, yes, the second one said, I'm not qualified. So then I felt pretty stupid. And I guess this is what I'm supposed to say. So I said, I'm not qualified. So then he said, okay, you can take in 6 months. In 6 months. For me, that felt like an eternity. So I ran after him. See, the thing is, I wasn't qualified. My only qualification is Prabhupada. Sorry, I've said this story millions of times. Don't know why today I'm becoming so emotional. So I explained that I had no other qualification than the shelter of Srila Prabhupada. So I took Diksha that day, next day. Actually, I was recommended for both initiations because I was set aside that I would be the pujari. They wanted me to be pujari, so I was inclined that way. But they had just stopped doing 2 initiations at once. So it appears that I was accepted for second because they told me you will receive second in 6 months. There's no records, no letters, nothing to talking about my second initiation, but 6 months later I received my Brahman Diksha. So at the time of initiation, here I am, I'm 17 years old, and I'm offering my life to Prabhupada. Devotees told me that when I was offering obeisances, he was smiling. Prabhupada was not in a very good mood. The devotees had been arrested while on Harinam. And he happened to be speaking from the first canto about Maharaj Yudhishthir's ruling the kingdom in such a exemplary way. And so he was talking about politics, the government, and it was sad to see that devotees would be arrested for trying to spread the holy name. But they said that he was smiling when I was offering obeisances. And my English was not so good, so I paraphrased each one of the 4 regulative principles. If there is a recording, maybe I'll know for sure if I ever said all 4. I have a feeling I only said 3. Because it was, and Prabhupada cut me off, okay, because it was taking so long. And then he said, your name is Yashomati, Mother of Krishna. I offered my obeisances, and as I was still my head down, I said, all glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. Now, when your head is down, offering obeisances, it just sounds like, can't understand what's being said. So by the time I sat up, Srila Prabhupada said, what? So by then I was looking at him straight in the eyes, and I said, all glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. This was our only exchange. All glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Your name is Yashomati, Mother of Krishna. That's it. This is the only exchange I ever had with Srila Prabhupada.
What I can remember is he would comment about the park, how beautiful it was, and that all cities should be full of parks. And then we got to this point where you could kind of see over a hill, and there was a highway. And, just it was early, of course, so it was just full of cars. And he said, just look at them going everywhere unnecessarily. And here we are walking in this beautiful place, chanting the names of God and feeling happy. He said, so that was kind of just it, And yeah, I'll, if I'm driving and the road's really busy, we're here at Canby, and I always remember that and think about all these people working so hard, as he always said, working hard like the ass, and for just, a little food and sex and intoxication. So yeah, that was pretty wonderful. That was a beautiful park. It's a huge park. I remember it well. All devotees say when on a walk with Prabhupada, just the effort to keep up with him. That was so hard to, it doesn't jive, you look at him and you think, it's always like, here's this little, little man, and yet he looked huge, he looked big, and it's hard to think to explain. And he's just like going, and we're all huffing and puffing, trying to keep up. So it was always wonderful. And that's really the only thing I can remember from those walks.
If Prabhupada were to say to me right now, I want you to go here, there, I would go. Yeah, without any question. I want him to say. I want him to come and say, okay, so wake up, do this, do that. No, he's everything. He's our savior. He's our future. He's our everything. We see through the eyes of Prabhupada. When a child is small and he's holding the hand of his father, and the father says, "Oh, he's my friend," then we like that person. Or if he says he's my enemy, he doesn't like me, he caused disturbance, then we see everything through the eyes of our spiritual master. Right? How else? That's the only vision we have. See everything through the eyes of Srila Prabhupada. You want to know Prabhupada? He does give us everything in the books, and the more that we see everything through the eyes of our spiritual master, the more ready we'll be to rejoin him wherever he is. If you want to go to the spiritual world, that's fine. But for me, Prabhupada is my spiritual world. Yeah.
So the next visit would have been in Melbourne, I believe 1974. And so Prabhupada was staying in a house of a devotee, and I was assigned to cook for him. So the first day, I go to make he told me what to make, and he wanted rice and whatever. And I make the rice, I take it in, or maybe Satsavrut took it in. And then he comes back in, Satsavrut said, Prabhupada wants to talk to you. And so I went in there and he said, why is the rice sour? And I said, Prabhupada always heard that you like lemon juice on your rice. But rather than get angry at me, he said, bring me some milk and some sugar. And he put the milk and sugar on the rice and he ate it. And that was all there was to it. So I felt very spared, And then later, I was making lunch, and I was really, I was a pretty good cook and everything, but I was having a bad day, just nervous, I guess. So, the scene is there's this little kitchen, there's flour, I've spilt the flour, there's flour everywhere, just a mess. Milk boiling over. Prabhupada comes walking by to go take his bath. And he stops and he's looking at me. And I turn around and he says, "Tomorrow I will teach you how to cook." And so, I cleaned up the mess and did the best I could. And so the next day, of course, I tell, you go back and you tell everybody in the temple, "Prabhupada's going to teach me how to cook tomorrow," whatever, you didn't know where that would go. But so he gets out that tiffin, his tiffin. And so he proceeded to show me how to use that properly. And he showed me how to, he said, I made the chapati dough, and he said, it's too stiff. And he said, just put it in a bowl of water and squeeze water into the dough until it's soft enough. So, so I made the lunch with him, and the chapatis came out really good. It was a trick to learn, about it. And it just, and there's devotees outside the kitchen watching, of course. And it was just a wonderful, beautiful thing to experience. And it's just like, it was just so kind. Srila Prabhupada was so kind and helpful and wanted you to understand in a very practical way how to carry on things. So then that night there was a pretty important talk he was going to give at a monastery. And he said, for your punishment, Deepak, you have to stay back and make kachoris. And so, you know, I made these kachoris that actually came out really, really good. And thank goodness. But he's laughing when he's telling you that for your punishment, you have to stay back and make the kachoris. So made the kachoris. He had his kachoris, and then all of the book distributors came into, I guess it was Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada's just sitting there chanting on his beads, and everybody's there, and I'm standing in the back, and then he says, Deepak gets the sweater, and he has his, one of his sweaters folded up there, and I'm like, me, and he gave me the, I got an offer on basis and got the sweater. It was so surprising. And all the, everybody was a little shocked, I think. Thought one of the big book distributors would get it. So, most mercy to the most fallen, but it's a beautiful incident.
In a way, I feel maybe it was fortunate that I never had such close association with Srila Prabhupada, because I'd learned to feel his presence through his books, through his instructions from seniors, and that kept going. I don't really know how those who had a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada were able to bear his disappearance. Because for me, he was present in his book, and he still was present in his book. He still is present in his books. And all the recordings, the devotees worked really hard to preserve his legacy. And that's still there.
He had me make a meal one evening, and he described the ingredients he wanted me to put in, fried eggplant, fried curd, potatoes. Wanted me to fry everything and make this dish. So he gave me the basic instruction, and then I went and I made this for him. And then I brought it in, and he ate it, and he called me and he said, "This is a meat eater's delight." He said, we should serve this always. He wanted me therefore he wanted me to make it for this. They were going to a speaking engagement. He said, make more and we'll take it to them and they will love that. So in Australia, at least, there's still people that make meat eaters delight. And, it's just like, gosh, I did it, made him happy. And recipe is actually in one of Kurma's cookbooks. It is, everything was fried, deep fried, in ghee, eggplant, potatoes, curd, and then some tomatoes in it, and just whey from the curd to make the broth. And it was pretty dang good. It was a wonderful thing, wonderful.
Prabhupada was asked by one of his senior devotees who was having trouble with a junior devotee. So the senior devotee asked Prabhupada, Prabhupada, why do you tolerate that devotee? And Prabhupada said, the same way that I tolerate you. So we come to that, just hearing little things like that makes us realize also how much we should actually be very tolerant. Lord Chaitanya says, Trinata Pisini Chaina. Prabhupada is a perfect example of it. He tolerated so many things from us, honestly. And he still does. In a day-to-day basis, he's allowing us to do so many carry on in so many ways, which is not really paka, But because the intention to please him is there, he's treating us like children, almost, What can we give Krishna? What can we give the spiritual master? He has everything. He's full of satisfaction. He only wants our benefit. He's doing for our benefit. So what can we give? Right? We try to do what we can, but if he's complete, so all we can do is ask him, what would you like us to do to help you? So when you're around senior devotees, older devotees, after a little while you get to understand, I might have a different type of personality, I might have a different point of view, but that doesn't mean that I have the right to negate or think that what he's doing, that there's something wrong with it. No, because as long as they're trying to please Srila Prabhupada, then that's what's important. They're trying to please Krishna, that's what's important. Well, who cares what the rest of society? That's not important. Who cares? Does Krishna care about our loving devotion to him, or about your criticism or my criticism of somebody who I don't really fully understand their relationship with Krishna or with spiritual master? So these kind of things we learn in association with other devotees. We get to know them, that we want to aspire to this. But so many of these things we learn from Prabhupada, and we learn from the devotees who had association with him. And after all, in the end, what's Prabhupada going to say? Is he going to say to us, you sat with me for 2 days? Or is he going to say, did you follow my instructions? What's going to be most important? So that is really, of course it's all wonderful, so I'm not saying, but from my point of view, I have to use that rationale anyway, because I didn't get that personal association, so I have to go in the path set out for me by Prabhupada and Krishna, because they're working side by side for my spiritual benefit, right? Yeah.
And then we had the Rath Yatra, and the most amazing thing I remember about that Rath Yatra is, one is that Prabhupada joined us at a certain point, and he danced and sang the whole way. It was, of course, that just electrified the devotees. And so I was playing the mridanga, and leading the kirtan with Madhavisa. And there's some wonderful pictures of this. Pictures putting the deities up on the carts. They were deities that we had carved and painted, and were meaningful, you know. And the look on Prabhupada's face, I can just recall that so clearly, and you can see it in the photo. There's a photo where my back's to the camera and he's looking at me. And it just made you feel we are all here together and helping Srila Prabhupada. We are part of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan army. And you felt so connected with him. It was just like, I'm not saying exactly mystical, but powerful and personal. And this is what we're meant to do. And here we go. It was really a wonderful, wonderful day. It couldn't have been more wonderful.
This is a process for the sage. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama Eva Kevalam. This is a process for the sage. It's simple. We don't need to stand on our toes. We don't need to do any gymnastic. We just need to chant with feelings. We just chant as a person to a person, a conversation with Krishna. We speak to him. Take me back. This is what chanting is about. It's a connection with Krishna. It's a relationship. It's not something that we just mumble for a short while in the morning and finally it's done. This is not relationship. Relationship means you give some love, then you will receive some love. If you give good, I'm finished, then you will get good, he's finished. This is what Krishna Mahamantra is about. What you give, you will get. But everything's contained within this mantra. Everything.
We also installed the Radha Vallabha deities, the large deities that are there in Melbourne, worshipped in Melbourne. And so when Prabhupada goes in the deity room first, I go in behind him. He pushes his slippers off. I pick them up and move them. And he says, go and wash your hands. And I'm like, oh, come on, Prabhupada. You don't have to wash your hands after your shoes. And it taught me something, that how humble he was, how humble and how seriously he took it all. And so I went and washed my hands, and we went through the installation of the deities together. And then the next morning, have the doors closed, Prabhupada's coming in, I can hear them out there, the kirtan's going, and I'm just lighting tons of incense. And then the doors open, and I'm thinking, this is going to be magical. The deities will appear out of the smoke. And then afterwards, he told me, said, that is too much incense. You are just meant to see the deities, not incense smoke. So, he's always correcting you, but with a gentle hand. He was never hard on me. And these little things, that I did wrong.
I think to learn to appreciate, as in the Ramayana, Garuda or Hanuman, these devotees, they did such big things, and that's wonderful. And the Lord, we hear about them all the time, but we also hear about the sparrow, the little bird, but just a little bit of sand. In other words, we should do what we can. We should do what we can and not try to exceed, like Maya can be very tricky. Maya can make us depressed because we're not actually achieving something we might have hoped to achieve. But, depression is just also her trick, because we become depressed in devotional service. We may think, oh, I'm not good, I'll leave, I'm not helping at all, I'm going to leave, give up. Or I'm not being appreciated, I'll just leave. No. We should understand that Srila Prabhupada appreciated everything that anybody tried to do in helping establish this movement. And he'll go on appreciating because he's always there, right? He reasons ill who think that Vaishnavas die while living still in sound. A written wonderful poem while Bhaktivedanta was meditating at the samadhi. So we should understand that the little bit of service, it all adds up. It all adds up over time. There's one verse, actually a purport, Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, verse 40. After Arjuna asked Krishna, what about the person who doesn't follow up and perfectly execute his devotional life? What happens to him? Isn't he worse off than anybody? And of course we know Krishna's response is no, he'll be born like this and that. There's a couple of sentences in that purport that Prabhupada says, even if you have to take birth in a lower form of life because of offenses, your Krishna consciousness will never be lost. And that struck me as very significant, because there are times in our spiritual lives when we will become disturbed by Maya. And if we, in other words, we should read Prabhupada's books, because we'll find little sentences and paragraphs like this that'll really impact us at the right time. I mean, there were times in my spiritual life when I had difficulty. I just opened Bhagavad Gita at some page, and even in that page, something Prabhupada or Krishna says is just the perfect time. So we shouldn't ever be tricked by Maya into depression. Oh, I'm useless, I'm no good. No. Everybody has ability. So in from my experience personally, and my recommendation from Prabhupada's books, is that you just keep going on with your service and trying to please your spiritual master, and that will be pleasing Srila Prabhupada. Yes.
There was a reunion in Sydney. This would have been about the last one that was held, so roughly 2002, maybe 2000, I think. Anyway, so my dear friend Korma Prabhu convinced me to come there, and so I did. And Madhavisa, whose health was suffering a bit then, but he gave me a letter, and it was a letter from Prabhupada to him, and just typical business, temple business. But there's a line in it where he says, it was also regarding an initiation, granting initiation to someone, and saying, please have her go on and serve the deities with Dipak. And it was like, gosh, Prabhupada knew who you were. He knew who I was, he remembered me, he knew my name, and that just like, how incredibly wonderful a thing to know that Prabhupada was conscious of you. So Madhavisa gave me that letter, and I have it hanging on the wall.
Srila Prabhupada, his personalism, his compassion and personalism going hand in hand. Seeing him interact with other individuals, he's so kind and loving and compassionate that even when speaking, the many videos that were there of Prabhupada speaking to others, he's always feeling compassionate towards us to free us from our difficulties, because he understands that there is life without misery. There's life without repeated birth and death. There's full satisfaction in the spiritual world, and he wants to share that with everybody. It's like in his talks, in his whether it's a lecture or whether it's personally talking to people, he's say, why do you continue suffering? Why are you doing this to yourself? You know, why are you harming yourself in so many different ways? These things all interfere. So the quality of compassion, most definitely, yeah.
It's compassion. It's compassion. As though Srila Prabhupada, as though Lord Chaitanya saved something special just for him. This developing of the Western world. All his godbrothers were, maybe not all, it's a generalization, but he was heavily criticized for the compassion he showed to the Kali Yuga people of the West. We had no qualities, no proper upbringing, and somehow he says he said to in a letter to Subal, and also in a class on Srimad Bhagavatam in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada says, don't chant Hare Krishna to attract a crowd. You just chant, and if Krishna is pleased, he will send the right people. This summarizes what he did. First Tompkins Square Park, and then wherever he went. He just thought, okay, I have the Maha Mantra to give. This is the instruction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is the instruction of my Guru Maharaj. So he just gave the mantra to whoever was sent to hear it by chance, by good fortune, by somehow. And he just did it, showing an example. This is what we should do also.
So the quality of Srila Prabhupada that I remember the most and was most affected by personally, it would be kindness. If I look in the 26 qualities, I would say he never, he could have, in the stories I tell, he could have said, bring someone else to cook or bring someone else to drive or anything, all the things I did wrong. And he never did any of that. He tried to teach me how to do it better. And to think of that, there were plenty of devotees around could have done what I did, And to think how he was trying so hard to nurture me, as he did with everyone, trying to nurture us, so we could perform devotional service in a good way and make spiritual advancement. It was obviously his only concern. And the feeling of connection that we had with him, and obviously he had with us, was just extraordinary to me. I think, all of us, after Prabhupada would leave Australia, we'd be talking and say, Prabhupada likes it here. You could just tell he likes it here in Australia. And I know he did. It was obvious, but that's the one I would say, that he wasn't like angry, wasn't scolding us, just trying to encourage us and help us to understand better how to perform devotional service in a good way. And, I've never forgotten that and carry that with me and pray for that to this day to help me as I've struggled along, I have, I spent many, many years out away from devotees and outside the movement. starting about 79, I was in India when Prabhupada passed, and then, just whatever went on then. Very disillusioned. So Prabhupada still gives me his mercy to remember him and to remember what it means to be a devotee and to be on the right path. And I never forget that. I told you about going back to Sydney for a reunion. I think it was 2012, actually, and getting that letter from Madhavisa. And that was a very inspiring thing for me, put me back on track. And I remember the first morning of that, being there in the temple room, in the Guru Puj, and having that same thought I had had when I first went to Los Angeles of, this is who I am. This is who I'm meant to be. And that connected me. And that is, to me, Prabhupada's magnanimity, his kindness towards me. It was there in his personal association. It is there through his books, through our understanding, through the power of chanting. I'm down in my garden early this morning chanting my rounds and, thinking about that, and just can bring you to tears still, And so that's the quality that I remember the most.
Je anilo premadana Karuna prachu Je anilo